6 previous spacewalks bring his total time to 31 hours and 14 minutes. The spacewalk today will also be the 7th for NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. His previous 6 spacewalks bring his career total time to 37 hours and 33 minutes. Back in the airlock, you've been looking live into the equipment lock section of the Quest airlock, where the crew is suited up, running through some final procedures before venturing out into the vacuum of space this morning. NASA astronaut Doug Hurley on your left is the crew's suit-up lead today, backed up by Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner. You can see Chris Cassidy on the right of your screen. He is designated as EV1 today, or Extravehicular Crew Member Number 1, wearing the suit bearing the red stripes, which you can see on his legs at the bottom right side of your screen. And on your left, Bob Behnken, who is designated as EV2 today, or Extravehicular Crew Member Number 2, wearing the suit with no stripes.
3, 2, 1. Begin exercise. And that's the 10th cycle. This will be our last cycle.
The two will be making their way to the far starboard truss of the International Space Station both today and again next Wednesday, July 1st, to replace aging nickel-hydrogen batteries on the first of two power channels for the S6 truss with new lithium-ion batteries and their associated adapter plates. Again, the batteries store power collected from the main solar arrays and distribute it throughout the station. The new lithium-ion batteries that will be involved in the spacewalks today and next Wednesday, and again in the mid-July timeframe, were carried to orbit on the last of the Japanese cargo ships HTV-9 on a pallet that is currently staged at the end of the space station's robotic arm, so that the batteries and their adapter plates can be removed from the pallet that they were brought to orbit on for installation into the integrated electronics assembly on the S6 truss. So 9 of the 12 older batteries that will be removed from the S6 truss will be put back on that external pallet for later jettisoning. The remaining 3 will remain on orbit due to space limitations. These battery power upgrades began in January of 2017 with a pair of spacewalks for the starboard 4 truss power channels. They continued in March of 2019 with a pair of spacewalks for the port 4 truss power channels, and most recently continued in October of last year with 4 spacewalks to upgrade the power channels on the port 6 truss of the station. Again today, the crew is going all the way to the other end of the truss to begin work to finish these power upgrades. Again, each lithium-ion battery and its associated adapter plate replaces a pair of older nickel-hydrogen batteries for the circuit that is required to complete the power routing through the various systems for the station for each truss segment. So in all, when the work is completed within the next month, 48 older nickel-hydrogen batteries will have been replaced by 24 new lithium-ion batteries.
Power channel upgrade. Chris, wearing the red stripe, egresses first. he sets up their tether anchors away from the airlock to enable them to go farther outboard. Then Bob, wearing the white stripe, grabs his foot restraint and follows outboard. Chris picks up his foot restraint on the CETA cart and heads to the external pallet, or EP. The external pallet is held by the robotic arm and houses the new batteries launched from Japan on HTV-9 in May. Chris sets up his tools and prepares his worksite. Bob translates to the S6 Integrated Electronics Assembly, or IEA, which will be his main worksite throughout the EVA. The IEA houses the batteries and hardware for the 1B solar arrays and power channel. Chris will join Bob and they work together to finish setup. First, battery from slot number 1 is retrieved. The crew needs to release torque with a ratchet, then use the pistol grip tool, or PGT, to complete the release of the bolts. The large battery is removed, and the crew work together to move it over to the EP for disposal. Chris ingresses the foot restraint, and the crew work together to install the battery in empty slot X. Then the arm maneuvers to place Chris in front of the first new battery in slot A. After placing scoops to create handholds, the crew will remove the battery and translate it back to the truss and install in empty slot number 1. Throughout the EVAs, Bob will need to move his foot restraint to reach each battery. Next, the battery in slot 2 is removed and translated over to the pallet. At the EP, Chris is in a foot restraint and places the battery on his BRT, or body restraint tether. Chris will release the adapter plate launched underneath the battery. Like with the batteries, he has to use the ratchet to release the high torque and then the PGT to fully release the bolt. Chris removes the adapter plate to hand to Bob. Bob translates back to the truss to install the adapter plate and open slot 2. At the same time, Chris is putting the old battery in the slot he had just emptied for disposal. Together on the IEA, they made a cable between the adapter plate and the new battery to complete the circuit. With one of the 3 battery pairs complete, they moved to slot 3 to remove the next old battery. This battery will be stowed on the adapter plate in slot 2, where it is no longer needed to function. Bob and Chris return to the pallet to retrieve battery B. They repeat the steps to release the bolts, translate back to the truss, and together install an empty slot number 3. At this point, Bob and Chris begin cleanup on the first of the 2 1 Bravo battery channel EVAs. They also prepare for the next EVA, including moving foot restraints, securing tools and bags where they will be needed. Once the worksite is clean, Chris translates from the end of the S6 truss, pausing to reconfigure their safety tethers on the return to the airlock. Bob follows for ingress, completing Power Channel 1 Bravo EVA 1.
So again, the primary tasks for today, as illustrated in that animation, are to remove 3 existing nickel-hydrogen batteries and replace them with 2 new lithium-ion batteries. The batteries store electricity for 1 pair of the station's solar arrays. Cassidy and Hurley will also be installing an adapter plate to complete the circuit to the new batteries and relocating the nickel-hydrogen batteries, 2 of which will be moved to an external platform for future disposal. And back in the Quest airlock, you can see the crew is starting to wrap up its spacewalk preparations, having completed a round of light exercise to purge nitrogen out of their bloodstreams, preventing decompression sickness from occurring once they step out of the airlock a short time from now. Again, in your view now, on the right is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and he's the crew's suit-up lead for today, backed up by Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner, who is in the left field of view. Back in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, the Orbit 2 team is on console, ready to execute the spacewalk under the direction of Flight Director Royce Renfrew. To his right at the Capcom console is the ground IV for today's spacewalk, Jasmine McBelly, who essentially serves as a spacewalk communicator, talking directly to the two spacewalkers from start to finish of the spacewalk today, helping them choreograph the tasks and procedures. And to her right is Capcom, or capsule communicator, David St. Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency. You'll hear him communicating with the crew all the way through depressurization this morning. Back in the equipment lock section of the Quest airlock, the crew is suited up, running through some final procedures before venturing out into the vacuum of space this morning. You can see Chris Cassidy on the right of your screen. He is designated as EV1 today, or Extravehicular Crew Member Number 1, wearing the suits bearing the red stripes, which you can see down there on the bottom of your screen on his legs. And on your left, Bob Benkin, who is designated today as EV2, or Extravehicular Crew Member Number 2, wearing the suit with no stripes.
Airlock, we're pausing the in-suit pre-breathe clock at GMT 10:17.
Copy.
And you just heard the voice of NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. Again, he's the crew's suit-up lead for today. He's in the middle of your screen now, backed up by Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner toward the bottom left side of your screen.
Houston airlock on 1. The expended MEDOX canisters attempts go to node 1, serial numbers 18 and 22, and they're both capped.
Okay, copy all.
Airlock pre-breathe, in-suit pre-breathe clock restarted at 10:21.
10:21.
Gents, next is the manual leak check, so check your suit pressure status, please. Okay, let me know when you're stable, 4.2 to 4.4, please. We're complete with the MEDOX flyout change-out procedure going back to step 15 in 1.225.
Okay, copy and concur. We'll see you back in 1.225.
And that call down you just heard from Doug Hurley. And a response from Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, David St. Jacques. Again, you'll hear him communicating with the crew all the way through depressurization this morning. And the jetpack now in
Just confirm safer 10.15 for EV1.
Yeah, it's affirmative. 1015 for EV1.
And now in Yvonne Wagner's hand is what's called a SAFER jetpack, while carrying the acronym SAFER for Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue. Spacewalkers wear these backpacks when they venture out as a precaution in the unlikely event that they would become untethered. They could propel themselves back to the safety of the International Space Station. Once those jetpacks are fixed to their spacesuits, Cassidy and Bankin will be moved through the hatchway you see at the top of your screen now into the crew lock section. The hatch will then be closed behind them, and the final preparations for depressurization of the crew lock will begin from 14.7 pounds per square inch all the way down to vacuum, which will be the final step before the crew conducts final communications and suit checks with the flight control team here in Houston. Doug Hurley and Yvonne Wagner will now work to install that SAFER onto Chris Cassidy's suit. And again, SAFER stands for Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue. Doug Hurley and Yvonne Wagner are now working to fix the simplified aid for EVA rescue, or SAFER by the acronym, on the back of Chris Cassidy's suit. Again, these jetpacks would be used in the highly unlikely event that the spacewalkers would become untethered during the spacewalk, and these jetpacks would give the crew the ability to then propel themselves back to the International Space Station. And these space suits, the extravehicular mobility units, or EMUs, are the suits you see Cassidy and Bankin in now. These suits essentially serve as an independent life support system, providing environmental protection, mobility, and communications for the crew members during their spacewalk. The spacewalk today marks the 228th spacewalk in support of International Space Station assembly, maintenance, and upgrades, and the first spacewalk for Expedition 63. This will be the 7th spacewalk for Station Commander Chris Cassidy. His 6 previous spacewalks bring his total time to 31 hours and 14 minutes. The spacewalk today will also be the 7th for NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. His previous 6 spacewalks bring his career total time to 37 hours and 33 minutes. The spacewalk today is the first spacewalk outside the station since January 25th, when Expedition 61 crew members Drew Morgan and Luca Parmitano completed work on the refurbishment and repair to the alpha magnetic spectrometer. The primary tasks for these spacewalkers today are to remove 3 existing nickel-hydrogen batteries and replace them with 2 new lithium-ion batteries. The batteries store electricity for 1 pair of the station's solar arrays. Cassidy and Hurley will also be installing an adapter plate to complete the circuit to the new batteries and relocating the nickel-hydrogen batteries, 2 of which will be moved to an external platform for future disposal. Again, you're looking live into the equipment lock section of the Quest airlock, where the crew is suited up, running through these final procedures, getting their SAFER jetpacks installed before they venture out into the vacuum of space. NASA astronaut Doug Hurley is the crew's suit-up lead today on your left, backed up by Yvonne Wagner on your right. Everything's still proceeding right on the timeline for the start of today's spacewalk. Doug Hurley and Yvonne Wagner now working to install Bob Behnken's SAFER jetpack on the back of his suit. And once Bob Behnken's safer jetpack is installed on the back of his suit, he will move through that hatchway into the crew lock section where Chris Cassidy is now. And then depressurization will be done in a two-stage fashion. First, they'll take the crew lock down to 5 pounds per square inch of pressure. They'll pause to do a system check, and then they'll resume the depressurization all the way down to vacuum. Once it reaches vacuum, the two spacewalkers, Chris Cassidy and Bob Behnken, will conduct suit checks and communications checks with Mission Control Houston before they place their suits on internal battery power, which will mark the official start of today's spacewalk. Back in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, the Orbit 2 team is on console, ready to execute the spacewalk under the direction of Flight Director Royce Renfrew. To his right at the Capcom console is the ground IV for today's spacewalk, Jasmine Mabelli, who serves as a spacewalk communicator, talking directly to the two spacewalkers from start to finish of the spacewalk today, helping them choreograph the tasks and procedures. And to her right now, talking to the flight director is Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, David St. Jacques of the Canadian Space Agency. And again, you'll hear him communicating with the crew all the way through depressurization this morning. And you can see Doug Hurley now moving Bob Behnken through the hatchway of the Quest airlock. With Cassidy and Behnken completely through the hatchway now, into the crew lock section of the Quest airlock, the hatch will be closed. This sequence of events now calls for NASA astronaut Doug Hurley to close the hatch, which will isolate Cassidy and Behnken in the crew lock section. Once the crew gets that go from teams here in Mission Control Houston, there will be a period of depressurization of the crew lock from its current 14.7 pounds per square inch all the way down to vacuum. The final communications between Mission Control and final checks of the spacewalkers' suits will be conducted, and the crew will then be given the go to place their suits on internal battery power, which will mark the official start of today's spacewalk.